He bought a ranch for $1. Then he met the girl who lived there. John had always felt like the city was closing in on him. The noise, the traffic, the endless crowds, it all felt suffocating. Every morning he would wake up to the same blaring alarm, rush through the same streets, sit in the same office, and stare at the same gray walls. He loved his job in a way, but he often wondered if this was all life had to offer. He longed for open spaces, fresh air, and a sense of freedom he hadn't felt since childhood. One rainy Saturday morning, while sipping his coffee and scrolling through random websites, John stumbled upon a listing that made him laugh out loud. The headline read, "Ranch for sale, only $1." He thought it must be a joke. Surely no one would sell a property for a single dollar, but curiosity tugged at him. He clicked on the listing and started reading. The ranch was located in a remote area far from the nearest town. The listing included a few blurry photographs showing an old farmhouse, overgrown fields, a broken fence, and what looked like an abandoned barn. The description said the house needed major repairs, the land had been neglected for years, and the utilities were almost non-existent. But somehow, John felt a spark of excitement. It was exactly what he had been looking for, a challenge, a new adventure, a way to escape the monotony of his city life. For the rest of the day, John couldn't stop thinking about the ranch. The more he imagined it, the more it seemed like the perfect opportunity. He pictured himself waking up to the sun rising over wide-open fields, drinking coffee on a wooden porch while listening to birds chirping. He imagined planting a garden, fixing the old barn, and finally having a place that felt entirely his own. By evening, he had made a decision. He would buy the ranch. The next few days were a whirlwind. John called the real estate agent listed in the advertisement and asked endless questions. He learned that the ranch had been in the same family for generations, but after the last owner passed away, no one had taken care of it. The property had fallen into disrepair, and because no one wanted the responsibility, the family had decided to sell it for a symbolic price of $1, hoping that someone would restore it. The agent warned John that it wouldn't be easy. The house was old, the roof was leaking, and the wiring was outdated. The land was wild and overgrown, but John wasn't deterred. He didn't want easy, he wanted real. After a week of paperwork, calls, and arrangements, John finally booked a flight to see the ranch in person. He packed lightly, bringing only a small suitcase, some tools he thought might be useful, and a notebook to jot down ideas. As the plane descended into the rural town near the ranch, he could see the vast fields stretching in every direction. It looked like a different world from the city he had left behind. When John arrived at the ranch, he was taken aback. The house was even more worn down than the pictures had shown. The paint on the walls had peeled away, the windows were dusty and cracked, and the porch sagged under years of neglect. Tall grass and weeds covered the yard, and the barn looked like it might collapse if he stepped inside. For a moment, doubt crept in. What had he gotten himself into? But then he reminded himself why he had come. He had wanted a challenge, and this was exactly it. John spent hours walking around the property, inspecting every corner. He climbed onto the roof to see the damage, opened cupboards to check for pests, and wandered through the fields imagining what could be done. Everywhere he looked, he saw potential. He could almost see the farmhouse restored, the fields cleared, and the barn repaired. The ranch could become a place of beauty and peace, but only if he was willing to put in the work. That evening, John sat on the sagging porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of calm. He realized that this ranch wasn't just about escaping the city, it was about starting over. It was about proving to himself that he could take something forgotten and neglected and turn it into something meaningful. It was about freedom, independence, and creating a life he could be proud of. Over the next few days, John started cleaning and organizing. He cleared some of the overgrown grass, patched small holes in the fence, and tried to make the house livable. He slept in a small guest room with just a bed and a lantern, but it felt like luxury compared to his tiny city apartment. Each day brought new challenges, leaking taps, broken doors, a stubborn gate, but also small victories. Every repaired window, every cleared path, every bird that returned to the yard made him feel closer to the life he had imagined. John also began exploring the surrounding land. There were fruit trees hidden among the wild bushes, a small stream that ran quietly behind the barn, and old trails that led to breathtaking views. He imagined turning part of the land into a garden, maybe raising a few chickens, and having a space where he could reconnect with nature. The more time he spent there, the more he realized that this ranch was more than just a property. It was a chance for a new life. One afternoon, as he sat sketching plans in his notebook, John heard a faint sound coming from the far side of the property. He paused and listened. It was the sound of someone moving through the tall grass. His heart skipped a beat. Had he missed something in the paperwork? Was there a neighbor or a caretaker he didn't know about? He decided to investigate, but slowly, cautiously. As he approached, he saw her, a young woman tending to a small garden that had somehow survived the years of neglect. She looked up, surprised to see him. John stopped in his tracks, realizing she had been living on the ranch all this time. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, and her eyes reflected both curiosity and caution. John felt a mix of emotions, surprise, uncertainty, and a strange sense of excitement. He introduced himself, explaining that he had just bought the ranch. The woman, whose name was Emily, listened carefully. She didn't seem angry, but she wasn't smiling either. Instead, she asked questions about why he bought the property, what he planned to do with it, and whether he knew the amount of work it would take to restore it. John answered honestly, admitting he didn't have all the answers, but that he wanted to make the ranch a home and preserve its beauty. Emily studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She didn't say much else that day, but John could sense a cautious approval. He realized that the ranch wasn't just about him anymore. It belonged to someone else too, someone who had cared for it, nurtured it, and kept it alive when others had forgotten. That thought made John feel both humbled and inspired. By the end of the week, John had settled into a rhythm. He worked on the house during the day, explored the land, and occasionally caught glimpses of Emily tending her garden or feeding the chickens she had kept. He felt a growing sense of connection to the ranch, and a curiosity about the woman who had protected it for so long. The $1 he had spent to buy the property suddenly seemed like a small price for the adventure, the challenge, and the unexpected possibilities that lay ahead. As he lay down to sleep on his first night in the old house, John felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. This ranch, this simple piece of land in the middle of nowhere, had already changed something inside him. He didn't know what the future held or how things with Emily would unfold, but he knew one thing. This was the beginning of a story he couldn't wait to live. The ranch for $1 had seemed absurd at first, a whim, almost a joke. But as John drifted off to sleep, listening to the wind through the trees and the creak of the old house settling, he realized that sometimes life's most unexpected opportunities are the ones that lead to the greatest adventures. And for John, the adventure had only just begun. John thought that buying the ranch for $1 was going to be a solo adventure. He imagined himself working the land, repairing the old house, and finally living the quiet, free life he had dreamed of. But he had not expected to find Emily already living there. At first, he wasn't sure what to do. He had seen her working in the garden when he arrived, and now that they had exchanged brief introductions, he realized there was a whole world of untold stories behind her quiet presence. Emily had lived on the ranch for years, though not always by choice. She had grown up hearing stories about the land, passed down from her grandparents who had owned it before it fell into neglect. When they passed away, Emily had stayed behind. She had no family nearby, no one to claim the property, and nowhere else to go. Slowly, over time, she had turned the abandoned house and overgrown fields into a livable home, one small victory at a time. To her, the ranch wasn't just land. It was a memory, a connection to the past, and something she couldn't let go of easily. The first few days with John were awkward. Emily was polite but cautious. She had seen strangers come and go over the years, most of them uninterested in the life she had built. Some wanted to buy the land and sell it. Others thought it was just a derelict property waiting to be claimed. Emily didn't know what to make of John. He seemed different. He had a quiet enthusiasm, a respectful way of moving through the house and the fields, and a genuine curiosity about the ranch. Still, she kept her distance, careful not to reveal too much about herself or her routines. John, on the other hand, was fascinated. Every day he found something new about the ranch that made him more invested. But it wasn't just the property, it was Emily herself. He admired how she moved through the garden with care, tending to plants that most people would have long ignored. He noticed the way she seemed to know the land intimately, the hidden paths, the places where water gathered after a rain, the spots perfect for planting trees. She spoke little, but each word carried thought and experience. Slowly, John realized that her presence wasn't a problem, it was an opportunity. He could learn from her, and perhaps she could see that he wasn't just another outsider. Over time, John started helping her with chores. He fixed a broken fence, cleared weeds from the garden, and even patched a few holes in the barn. At first, Emily watched, silently assessing whether he could handle the work. She didn't want the ranch to fall into the hands of someone who didn't understand it. But John worked diligently, never complaining, always asking questions and listening carefully to her advice. He learned how to tend the soil, how to manage the water supply, and even how to coax plants back to life after years of neglect. The more time they spent together, the easier the silence became. Emily started explaining her routines, the early morning chores, the small rituals she followed to keep the ranch alive, and the lessons she had learned from years of solitude. John listened, fascinated. He realized that she had created a home in a place many would have abandoned long ago. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that made him feel both admiration and a strange sense of connection. One afternoon, after a long morning of work, John and Emily sat on the porch together, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The ranch was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the stream, the occasional call of a bird. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. John realized that he was no longer just a visitor, he was becoming part of the ranch's story. Emily, too, seemed to notice the shift. She was still cautious, but her guarded expressions softened when he shared his ideas, laughed at small jokes, or offered to help with difficult tasks. Evenings were the hardest. After a full day of labor, John often found himself alone in the old house, reflecting on what he had learned. The city seemed far away, almost unreal compared to the tangible work of the ranch. He wrote in his notebook, sketching plans for repairs, noting improvements, and sometimes scribbling down observations about Emily. How she moved, how she spoke, how she seemed to belong to the land in a way he was only beginning to understand. He felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. He didn't yet know if Emily would fully accept him, but he wanted to try, not just for himself, but for the ranch they both cherished. Challenges were constant. A sudden rainstorm flooded parts of the fields, washing away soil and damaging young plants. A broken water pump left them scrambling to carry water manually. Rodents had found their way into the barn, and John had never worked with farm animals before. Emily, patient and knowledgeable, guided him through each problem. She didn't criticize, but she didn't let him take shortcuts either. Each challenge became a lesson in resilience, and John learned to rely on both her experience and his determination. During these weeks, small moments of connection began to emerge. Emily showed John secret spots on the property, a hidden grove of oak trees perfect for picnics, a quiet stream where the water was clear and cold, and even a patch of wildflowers that bloomed every spring. John shared stories about the city, his childhood, and his dreams for the future. He laughed at her witty comments and listened attentively when she spoke of her memories and her struggles. Slowly, they built trust, not through grand gestures, but through shared work, respect, and quiet companionship. Despite the growing bond, there were moments of tension. Emily sometimes questioned John's decisions, worried that his plans might change the ranch in ways she didn't like. She was protective of the land, and rightfully so. It had been her responsibility for years. John, too, struggled with the balance between improvement and preservation. He didn't want to disrupt what Emily had created, yet he couldn't ignore his vision for restoring the ranch. They disagreed occasionally, but those disagreements were never harsh. They were conversations filled with thought, compromise, and mutual understanding, showing that their connection was grounded in respect. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, John and Emily worked side by side, repairing a fence that had been damaged by wind. They moved silently, but the silence was comfortable, not awkward. For the first time, John realized he didn't mind her presence. It made the ranch feel more alive, more human. Emily, noticing his attention to detail and care, smiled softly, acknowledging his effort without words. In that moment, both of them understood that their lives were beginning to intertwine in ways neither had expected. Even at the end of the day, when the work was done and the sky turned golden with sunset, they didn't rush away from each other. They would sit on the porch, sipping tea or water, sharing stories, and simply watching the ranch breathe. Emily told John about her grandparents, about the traditions that had kept the land alive, and about the solitude she had endured. John shared his fears and hopes, admitting how nervous he had been when he first discovered her living there. With each shared story, each small smile, and each cooperative task, their connection deepened, built on trust, understanding, and a shared love for the ranch. John realized that the ranch for $1 had been far more than a bargain. It had been a gateway to something unexpected. It had introduced him to Emily, a person who embodied resilience, wisdom, and quiet strength. It had shown him the satisfaction of physical labor, the beauty of nature's rhythms, and the importance of patience. Most importantly, it had reminded him that life often surprises you in ways that no plan can predict. He had come seeking solitude and freedom, but he had found connection, friendship, and a partner in caring for something precious. As the weeks passed, John began to see the ranch not as a property he had purchased, but as a living, breathing place shaped by the hands of those who cared for it. And Emily, once wary of him, began to see that John was more than a stranger. He was someone who could share the ranch's burdens and joys, someone who could learn, respect, and grow alongside her. Their relationship was quiet, gradual, and unspoken at times, but it was real, rooted in the land and nurtured by shared experience. By the end of the month, the ranch was starting to feel alive in a way it hadn't for years. Paths were cleared, fences repaired, and the garden was thriving under their combined care. John and Emily worked together, laughed together, and occasionally disagreed, but always with respect. Each day brought new lessons, new connections, and a deeper understanding of what the ranch truly meant. For John, it wasn't just about owning land for $1 anymore. It was about being part of something larger, something enduring, and something profoundly human. In those early days, John realized that life on the ranch was not easy, but it was real, meaningful, and fulfilling in ways the city never had been. Emily's presence, once a surprise and a challenge, had become an essential part of the experience. She was the keeper of the land, and now, slowly, she was becoming a companion on his journey. And together, without rushing or forcing, they began to shape not just the ranch, but the beginning of a shared story, one rooted in respect, resilience, and the unexpected beauty of life in a place where the world seemed to slow down. John had grown used to the rhythm of life on the ranch. Every morning, he would wake to the soft light of dawn filtering through the broken curtains of the farmhouse. The air smelled of earth, grass, and dew, a sharp contrast to the concrete and exhaust fumes of the city. He would quietly step outside, stretching as he surveyed the land. The fields, still wild but slowly improving under their care, seemed almost alive with potential. Emily had become his guide, his teacher, and in small ways, his companion. She moved with a quiet efficiency that amazed him. There was no wasted motion in the way she carried water to the garden, checked the fencing, or tended to the chickens. Her hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, but they were precise, gentle, and capable. John admired her silently, realizing that much of what he thought he knew about rural life was only theory. Emily was living proof of how to survive and thrive in this world. At first, their interactions had been cautious. John remembered the initial tension, the silence, the careful words, the polite but distant glances. But over time, trust began to build layer by layer. It was not sudden, not dramatic, but steady. When John fixed a broken fence correctly, Emily nodded approvingly. When he helped carry water from the stream, she smiled in quiet recognition. Small gestures, almost imperceptible, became the foundation of their growing connection. As days turned into weeks, John discovered that living on the ranch required patience more than anything else. Some mornings were spent repairing broken tools, while others involved digging trenches for irrigation or clearing overgrown paths. There were unexpected setbacks. A sudden rainstorm washed away young plants, a misstep while repairing the barn sent him sprawling in mud, and wild animals occasionally destroyed parts of their garden. Each problem tested his resolve, but Emily was always there, calmly guiding him, showing him solutions, and gently correcting his mistakes. Through these shared struggles, John began to feel a deeper connection not just to the land, but to Emily. He admired her resilience, her quiet courage, and her unwavering commitment to the ranch. He noticed the way she paused to study the soil before planting seeds, or the careful way she patched a leaking roof without hesitation. Emily's knowledge seemed limitless, and John felt both respect and humility in her presence. Yet there was also a sense of ease between them, a growing comfort that words alone could not capture. One afternoon, while repairing the fence near the old barn, John and Emily paused to rest. Sweat dripped down their foreheads, and their hands were scratched and dirty. The silence between them was easy, companionable, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared labor. Emily suddenly gestured toward the barn, suggesting an idea for a better storage space. John listened, surprised at how practical and clever her suggestion was. He realized that together they could accomplish much more than he had imagined alone. As the days passed, John started noticing small details about Emily that made him smile. How she tucked stray hair behind her ear when concentrating, how she hummed softly while working, how her eyes sparkled when she talked about the land she loved. He felt a growing admiration that went beyond respect for her skills. It was something warmer, deeper, though he was careful not to let it show too openly. Emily, too, seemed to notice him more, though she remained careful, keeping her emotions measured and her trust earned rather than given. One particularly challenging week, a storm struck the ranch with unexpected force. The winds tore through the trees, breaking branches, toppling the weaker fencing and flooding sections of the garden. John and Emily worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, salvaging what they could. John carried buckets of water for hours, cleared fallen branches, and patched holes in the roof, while Emily coordinated their efforts with a calm efficiency that kept panic at bay. That storm, though exhausting, brought them closer. They laughed quietly over minor mishaps, shared brief moments of encouragement, and discovered the strength of teamwork in a way that words alone could not express. Evenings after work became a small ritual. They would sit on the porch, sipping warm tea or water, watching the sun paint the horizon in shades of gold and red. Sometimes they spoke about the past. Emily shared stories about her grandparents and her childhood. John told tales of the city, his work, and his childhood dreams. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees or the distant murmur of the stream. Each evening felt like a gentle confirmation that they were no longer just co-inhabitants of the ranch. They were companions in the truest sense, connected by shared effort and mutual respect. One day, John suggested planting a new vegetable patch. Emily raised an eyebrow but agreed. They spent the entire morning preparing the soil, laying out the rows and planting seeds carefully. John struggled at first, awkwardly handling the delicate plants, but Emily guided him patiently, showing him the right depth for planting, how to space seeds, and when to water. By the time they finished, the new patch looked promising. They stepped back, tired but satisfied, and exchanged a smile, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. Despite the growing connection, challenges remained. John sometimes worried about overstepping boundaries. Emily had lived a largely solitary life, and he didn't want to disrupt the balance she had maintained for years. She, too, sometimes hesitated, unsure whether John truly understood the value of the land beyond its physical structure. Misunderstandings occasionally flared, arguments over planting techniques, or the best way to repair a fence. But these conflicts were minor, resolved quickly with conversation and compromise. Each disagreement, rather than driving them apart, strengthened their understanding of each other. There were also moments of unexpected humor and joy. John discovered a hidden patch of wildflowers behind the barn, and Emily laughed as he clumsily tried to arrange them into a small bouquet. They played small pranks on each other, joked about city versus country life, and even found amusement in the stubbornness of a goat that refused to enter its pen. These lighthearted moments provided relief from the hard work and built a bond of friendship that felt effortless and genuine. John began to see the ranch as a place of growth, not just in the physical sense, but in emotional and personal terms as well. The land taught patience, resilience, and attention to detail. Emily's presence taught him respect, humility, and the quiet power of dedication. He realized that the ranch had changed him. He was no longer the man who had arrived with city expectations and a romanticized vision of country life. He was learning to live in the moment, to embrace hard work, and to appreciate the simple beauty of sunrises, bird calls, and shared laughter. One morning, after a week of heavy rain, John noticed Emily standing near the stream, watching the water rise and swirl around the rocks. He approached cautiously, unsure if he should speak. She turned and smiled softly, a mix of amusement and relief. "The rain makes everything more alive," she said. John nodded, realizing that he had come to see the ranch and Emily's perspective as a place of constant learning and wonder. The deeper John became involved in life on the ranch, the more he realized how much Emily had sacrificed to protect it. She had given up comfort, convenience, and social life to care for this land. Her commitment wasn't about ownership or money. It was about love, loyalty, and responsibility. John felt both admiration and gratitude. He wanted to honor her efforts, to learn from her, and to contribute meaningfully to the home she had preserved for so long. By the end of the month, John and Emily had developed a rhythm together. They worked, rested, planned, and explored. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new moments of connection. They learned to anticipate each other's needs without speaking, to cooperate silently on tasks, and to appreciate each other's strengths. Emily began to smile more openly around John, and he noticed that her laughter, rare and precious, seemed to brighten the entire ranch. Through all of this, John understood that his purchase of the ranch for $1 had been far more than a simple financial transaction. It was the beginning of a journey, one that required patience, resilience, and humility. And the most unexpected part of all was Emily. She had been living there quietly, patiently, caring for the land, and now she had become central to his experience, a partner in the literal and emotional labor of creating a home. As he lay down to sleep one evening, exhausted but content, John thought about how the ranch had transformed him. The work was hard, the challenges unending, but the rewards were deeper than he could have imagined. He felt a growing respect and quiet affection for Emily, a recognition of the life she had built, and a desire to be worthy of sharing in it. The connection between them was subtle but undeniable, shaped by shared effort, mutual trust, and a deep love for the land. John realized, as he drifted into sleep, that life on the ranch was not just about owning property. It was about learning, growing, and connecting in ways that mattered. Emily had opened his eyes to a world he had never known, a world where patience, hard work, and care mattered more than speed, convenience, or profit. And in the process, he had found someone whose presence transformed the ranch from a mere adventure into a place of shared meaning, hope, and quiet happiness. Life on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, but John and Emily soon realized that living together and caring for the land came with its own unexpected challenges. The initial excitement of repairing the farmhouse and clearing the fields was slowly giving way to harder decisions. Every day presented small conflicts, disagreements, and moments of tension that tested both their patience and their bond. John had big ideas. He wanted to restore the house completely, repair the barn so it could store tools and supplies efficiently, and even plant a larger garden to provide food for themselves year-round. He dreamed of adding modern conveniences that would make life easier, like a small greenhouse, a solar water system, and perhaps even a well-maintained path for walking around the property. To him, the ranch was a blank canvas, full of potential and waiting to be shaped. Emily, however, saw the ranch differently. To her, it was not just a property to be improved or modernized. It was a place of history, memory, and quiet life. She had lived there for years, maintaining its simple beauty and preserving the land the way her grandparents had taught her. She worried that too much renovation could erase the character of the place she loved. For every idea John had, she offered a careful caution, urging him to consider the impact on the natural rhythm of the ranch. At first, these differences were subtle. A disagreement over planting rows in the garden, or whether a section of fence should be replaced or repaired in place, sparked small debates. John was used to quick decisions and efficient solutions, while Emily moved carefully, weighing each choice against the long-term health of the ranch. Their conversations became longer, sometimes more tense, as they tried to reconcile practicality with tradition. The real test came one afternoon when John proposed rebuilding the barn entirely. He had drawn plans, collected materials, and was eager to start. Emily listened quietly, then shook her head. "It's not just about building a new barn," she said gently. "The barn has character." It has history, we can fix it without tearing it down. John felt a flash of frustration. He thought she was being too cautious, too tied to the past. But as he looked at her determined expression, he realized that this wasn't just stubbornness. It was love for the land, a desire to honor what had come before. They spent the next few days negotiating, sketching alternative designs, and experimenting with repairs. It wasn't easy. There were moments when both of them felt exhausted and misunderstood. But gradually, they began to understand each other better. John learned that some things were worth preserving exactly as they were, while Emily saw that certain improvements could make life easier without destroying the ranch's charm. Their differences, once a source of tension, became a way of learning from each other. Outside influences added another layer of complexity. A neighbor from the nearby town stopped by, curious about the new owner of the ranch. When he learned that Emily had been living there long before John arrived, he raised questions about legality, rights, and responsibility. Suddenly, what had seemed like a personal adventure became a matter of paperwork, local authority, and negotiation. Emily worried that outsiders might force her off the land, while John realized that ownership came with responsibilities he had not fully anticipated. Amidst these challenges, a new layer of emotion began to emerge between them. Living and working side by side, they shared frustrations, victories, and quiet moments that neither could ignore. There were evenings when they laughed together over small mishaps, and nights when the silence between them was filled with unspoken connection. John noticed the way Emily's eyes lit up when she solved a problem or discovered a hidden treasure in the land. Emily, in turn, saw John's dedication, his willingness to learn, and the care he put into every task. Slowly, admiration deepened into something warmer and more personal. Yet with this growing closeness came uncertainty. Emily had built her life in solitude. She had learned to rely on herself, to manage without anyone else's help. Trust had to be earned, and even though she felt affection for John, she hesitated to let him fully into her world. John, too, felt the weight of responsibility, not just for the ranch, but for the emotional space Emily guarded so carefully. Every small gesture, every shared task, was measured against the possibility of upsetting the balance they had created. One morning, after a particularly long night of rain, the ranch looked almost unrecognizable. The garden was flooded, parts of the fence had collapsed, and debris littered the field. Both John and Emily worked tirelessly to salvage what they could. Their hands were raw, their clothes soaked, and the work seemed endless. In the midst of this struggle, they relied on each other in ways words could not capture. John carried heavy logs for Emily while she guided him to weak spots in the fence. They moved together, coordinating silently, each trusting the other completely. By the time the sun rose high in the sky, they had restored order, not perfectly, but enough to continue. These shared struggles became the foundation for their bond. Each challenge, each repair, each problem solved together strengthened their connection. They began to speak more openly, sharing thoughts and feelings they had kept to themselves for years. John admitted his fears, fear of failing, of not being enough, of disrupting Emily's life. Emily spoke of the loneliness she had endured, the worry that someone might come and claim what she had nurtured, and the pride she felt in keeping the ranch alive. Listening to each other, they realized that their lives were intertwining in ways neither had expected. At the same time, practical questions loomed. Who would manage the ranch if one of them had to leave? How would they divide responsibilities? Could they truly balance improvement with preservation? These were not easy questions, and there were no simple answers. Some days, disagreements flared. A plan for the garden would be rejected, or a repair method debated. But even in conflict, they learned patience. Arguments ended not with resentment, but with compromise, discussion, and renewed effort to understand one another. Through all of this, small acts of kindness and care revealed their growing affection. John began leaving freshly repaired tools for Emily before she woke, knowing she would need them for her morning work. Emily started preparing extra water or food for John during long workdays, leaving small notes of encouragement. These gestures, quiet and unspoken, built a subtle intimacy that was stronger than words. They were learning not just to coexist, but to support, trust, and care for each other in a way neither had anticipated. One afternoon, while exploring the far end of the property, John stumbled across a small grove he had never noticed. Emily had led him there with a smile, explaining it had always been her secret place for reflection. They sat together under the shade of tall trees, watching the wind ripple through the leaves. Emily shared memories of her grandparents, how they had taught her the value of patience and connection to the land, and how every tree, plant, and stream had meaning. John listened, struck by the depth of her attachment and the quiet beauty of her world. It was moments like these that showed John the true value of the ranch, and of Emily. It wasn't just about land or property. It was about history, care, and love that had been built over decades. He realized that his ideas, while ambitious and sometimes forceful, needed to respect this legacy. Emily, too, recognized that John's energy, optimism, and willingness to work were invaluable. Together, they could create something neither could do alone, a home that honored the past while embracing the future. By the end of the month, their relationship had reached a subtle, yet undeniable turning point. They trusted each other not only with the land, but with their thoughts, fears, and aspirations. They were learning to navigate the challenges of work, disagreement, and emotion together. Even when conflict arose, it became an opportunity for understanding and growth rather than division. Their lives were no longer separate. They were intertwined with the rhythm of the ranch and with each other. And yet, the future remained uncertain. Questions about ownership, preservation, and long-term plans loomed in the background. Both John and Emily knew that they would need to make decisions together, to compromise, and to plan carefully for what lay ahead. But they were no longer afraid of challenges, for they had learned to face them side by side. The ranch had become more than land. It was a symbol of connection, trust, and resilience. Through the struggles, small victories, and quiet moments, John and Emily discovered something rare. A partnership built not only on shared labor but on respect, trust, and emerging affection. They had come to understand that living on the ranch was not simply about ownership or improvement, but about nurturing, preserving, and growing together. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of closeness that neither had anticipated. By the time the sun set on another long day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John and Emily stood together on the porch, surveying the land. The fields, though imperfect, were alive. The house, though still worn, had a warmth it had not known in years. And in that quiet moment, they realized that their lives, their work, and their hearts were bound together in a shared story, one that was just beginning to unfold. Months had passed since John bought the ranch for $1. What had started as a personal adventure had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. The house, once crumbling and abandoned, now had sturdy walls patched with care, a repaired roof, and freshly painted doors that creaked in the wind. The barn, while still old, had been reinforced and organized, ready to hold tools, supplies, and even a few small animals. The fields, though still wild in places, were beginning to take shape under the joint care of John and Emily. Every corner of the ranch reflected the work of both hands, the dedication of both hearts. Emily and John had developed a rhythm together that went beyond cooperation. They woke early to tend the animals, water the garden, and inspect the land for any damage from storms or wildlife. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging ideas or stories. There was a quiet comfort in their companionship, a sense of trust that made even the hardest tasks easier. Emily had slowly opened up more, letting John into her world, sharing memories of her grandparents and her own life, while John shared his experiences from the city and his reasons for wanting a new beginning. Though their connection had grown, the question of ownership and future plans remained. John had purchased the ranch, but Emily had lived there for years, caring for it and shaping it into a home. They spent long evenings discussing what this meant for both of them. Should Emily officially become a co-owner? How could they manage responsibilities fairly? How could they balance improvement with preservation? These were not easy questions, and sometimes they disagreed. But through these discussions, they discovered the depth of their respect and care for each other. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the porch where they often sat, John turned to Emily. "I don't want this to be just my ranch," he said. "I know you've cared for it long before I arrived. I want us to share it together, not just for the land, but for the life we're building here." Emily looked at him, her expression thoughtful, then smiled softly. "I think that's the only way it should be," she replied. And so they agreed. Emily would officially become a co-owner, making the ranch theirs in every sense, a shared home, and a shared responsibility. With that decision made, a sense of freedom and unity washed over them. They began planning long-term projects together, expanding the garden, planting fruit trees, and creating paths through the woods for quiet walks. John suggested adding a small greenhouse to extend their growing season, and Emily agreed, carefully selecting a spot that would not disrupt the natural landscape. They laughed, debated, and compromised, each learning from the other's perspective. The ranch was no longer a solitary project. It was a shared dream taking shape with every choice they made. As spring arrived, the ranch blossomed in ways neither had expected. The garden flourished with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Bees buzzed through the newly planted wildflower patch. Birds nested in the trees, and small animals found safe shelter in the barns and underbrush. John and Emily found joy not only in the work itself, but in witnessing life return to a place that had once been forgotten. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now vibrated with energy and growth, a reflection of the care, effort, and love poured into it by two people working together. Through all the labor and planning, their relationship deepened naturally. They shared small moments of tenderness. A hand brushed against another while planting seeds, a shared smile at a joke, a comforting presence during a long day of work. They began to trust each other not only with tasks but with emotions, knowing that both had the same goal: a safe, thriving home and a life that felt meaningful and full. For John, Emily was no longer just a partner in labor, she was a companion in life. And for Emily, John was no longer just a stranger who bought the ranch. He was someone who respected her, supported her, and shared her vision for the future. The ranch also became a place of learning. John taught Emily some techniques he had read about or observed in his travels, while Emily shared her knowledge of the land, animals, and seasonal cycles. They discovered that each day brought new challenges, from managing pests in the garden to repairing fences damaged by storms. But these challenges were no longer sources of stress or tension. They were opportunities to work together, to grow stronger, and to enjoy the satisfaction of a problem solved. Every success, no matter how small, became a shared victory. One particularly sunny afternoon, they decided to take a walk through the nearby woods, a quiet place Emily had always loved. The forest smelled of pine and earth, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. They walked slowly, side by side, speaking little, content to simply share the moment. At a clearing, Emily pointed to a spot where wildflowers bloomed abundantly. "This was my secret place," she said softly. John smiled, realizing that he had now become part of her world, welcomed into the spaces she had once kept private. That small act of trust, sharing her secret place, felt monumental to him. As the months passed, the ranch became more than a home. It became a symbol of resilience, hope, and partnership. John realized that the $1 he had spent to buy the land was insignificant compared to what he had gained. The ranch had given him purpose, taught him patience, and introduced him to a life that was real, grounded, and fulfilling. Most importantly, it had brought Emily into his life, a person whose presence transformed the property from a simple adventure into a home filled with love, respect, and shared dreams. They also began to plan for the future in practical ways. John and Emily talked about creating sustainable systems for water, energy, and food production. They considered planting orchards, raising a few animals for eggs and milk, and maintaining the land in a way that would allow them to enjoy its beauty for years to come. Each plan was discussed carefully, balancing ambition with respect for the land's natural rhythm. Together, they learned that true partnership required patience, compromise, and constant communication. Evenings remained a cherished time. After long days of work, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills, sharing a quiet drink and reflecting on the day. They spoke of hopes, fears, and dreams. Sometimes the conversations were deep and serious. Other times they were filled with laughter and lighthearted jokes. In those moments, the ranch felt like a sanctuary, not just a physical space, but a place of emotional refuge and connection. Through all the growth, challenges, and daily routines, John and Emily discovered something rare and precious. Love built slowly, rooted in trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. Their connection was not sudden or dramatic, but steady and enduring. They had learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, supported each other through setbacks, and celebrated victories together. What had started as a chance encounter on a $1 ranch had become a partnership in every sense of the word, one that promised to last for years to come. By the time the first winter came, the ranch had become a place of warmth and stability. The house, though still old, was comfortable. The fields, covered in a blanket of frost and snow, rested in quiet anticipation for the next spring. John and Emily would sit by the fireplace, sharing stories, planning new projects, and simply enjoying the comfort of being together. The world outside, with its noise and rush, seemed distant and unimportant. Here, they had found a life that was both simple and profound. Reflecting on the journey, John often thought about how one small decision, the $1 purchase, had changed everything. He had arrived seeking escape, adventure, and a new beginning. What he had found was far richer: a home, a purpose, a deep connection with the land, and the presence of someone who had taught him the true meaning of care, patience, and partnership. Emily had been living there all along, and he realized that meeting her had been the most significant part of the journey. On a crisp morning, as they stood together in the garden, surveying the fruits of their labor, John turned to Emily. "I never imagined this," he said quietly. "Not the ranch, not the work, and certainly not you." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight and a quiet joy. "Sometimes life surprises you," she replied, "and sometimes those surprises are the best things that ever happen." In the end, the ranch for $1 was more than a bargain. It was a gateway to a new life. It had challenged John, inspired Emily, and united them in a shared vision. They had learned to navigate differences, face hardships, celebrate successes, and care for something greater than themselves. And most importantly, they had discovered that life, when shared with someone who respects and understands you, can be richer, deeper, and more fulfilling than anything you could imagine. The ranch, once abandoned and silent, now echoed with laughter, work, and quiet companionship. John and Emily had built a home, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. Together, they had turned a small, forgotten piece of land into a place of growth, love, and lasting memories. And as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, they knew this was only the beginning of their life together, filled with shared dreams, hard work, and the promise of many beautiful days to come.